Okay, a few highlights from Chapter 20 on instructions and procedures. I say this with every presentation, but I want to emphasize it again here. Your chapter has really great examples of what instructional documents might look at, including a walkthrough of a situation which requires instructions and then instructions which are appropriate to it. So spend some time with that chapter. You're going to see, especially pay attention to the formatting, the layout of instructions. You're going to find that will have a tremendous impact on what your own instructions will look like at the end of this process. But I wanted to hit, again, a few highlights with you as I've been doing. First of all, your text makes a distinction between instructions and procedures. Instructions are what we tend to think of as um, documents that teach us how to do something or tell us how to do something. An instructional manual, for example, or a book or a website that walks us through how to change a toilet or something like that. Procedures are documents which are really more present in the workplace than they are in our kind of day-to-day life. These are instructions that make sure that everybody in a group follows the same steps to do certain things. What this means, for example, is if I need to get some vacation time at work, there's a procedure in place for that. There's not a set of instructions teaching me how to do vacation. They're just a series of steps, notifying my immediate supervisor, making a formal request through HR. There's a list of steps that describe how things have to be done. You will encounter procedures a lot. Typically, when you get a new job, you are given a procedures manual, or at least shown where to find the procedures on the company website, so that you know how to do things correctly within the organization. We're focused on instructions, which teach you how to do something, teach you to kind of spell out a set of tasks to or a set of steps to accomplish a task. Audience and purpose, as they are for every document, are very important for instructions. In fact, they're especially important for instructions. Your audience here will typically consist of anyone who needs to know how to complete that task, but keep that as specific as possible. Okay, so for example, if you are teaching somebody how to change the tire of a bike, okay, yeah, you can write that in a very general way that will potentially be accessible to anybody and everybody, but it could be more useful if, for example, you have an idea of the technical abilities of the specific audience. So if your instructions are written for lifelong cyclists, they probably have a better understanding of their bicycle than somebody who's just bought a bike. Okay, so try to narrow that audience as much as possible. It actually makes your job easier because you can anticipate what information they might need that other people might not need, or what information they might not need because they know it already. If somebody's familiar with the tools that you use to work with a bicycle, you won't need to go into great detail explaining what they are and what they work. If they're not, then you're going to have to spend more time with what those tools actually are and how they function. Okay. The purpose of instructions and procedures is to make sure your audience can complete the task. So that means not leaving out any crucial steps, but also just not leaving out any background information people might need. So if there are terms, tools, requirements, other procedures that people have to understand, you've got to bear that in mind. This is one reason as you write instructions, you really don't want to choose something like how to play baseball. Because how to play baseball, it's a very large, very complicated task. If you talk about one aspect of it, right, how to pitch, even that is going to require you to bring in and define other terms like what is a runner, what is a home run, what is a base run, and those sorts of things that might not be directly related to your task. Imagine if you tackled that for every single element of that game. Okay, so just be conscious. Your readers might have informational needs that require you to add more information. Also keep safety in mind. If there's a way somebody can mess something up in a way that will injure them, somebody will do that. And you have to really, without going to extremes, you have to really anticipate where people might run into trouble and make sure that is clearly identified. Landon identifies and gives examples of a number of different types of instructional documents. You are basically creating an instructional brochure without really making it formally in the brochure format. But if you have an interest in developing another type of instructions, like an instructional card, hyperlinked online instructions, something like that, just run it by me. I don't have the underlying task is the same, so I'm reasonably all right with that. Elements of effective instructions. First of all, make sure that the title and the introduction clearly identify what is being learned. Okay, so if you are teaching a subtask of a larger task, for example, pitching, as opposed to the entire game of baseball, make sure that is clearly identified in the title. So readers look at the title, they know exactly what they're going to learn. Okay, make sure the content is informed, and this may involve research, even if you know how to do the thing you're teaching. For one thing, to make sure you've been doing it right. There's not an easier way to do it, a more efficient way of doing it, or that maybe you haven't. A lot of times, if we figure out how to do something on our own, or if we've just done something a lot, you kind of leave out steps that for a beginner would probably be important to leave in. So make sure you really know what you're talking about, and don't necessarily go just based on your own experience. You might want to see how other people complete the task as well. Include visuals, and again, look at the chapter very carefully for the kinds of visuals that can be included. Different types of diagrams that give readers a really visual indication of what you're trying to describe, or visuals that maybe show how the task is done. Photographs are sometimes the least helpful visuals because it can be hard to make out what's happening in a photograph. I don't want you randomly throwing in visuals, but I do want you to include visuals. If you have a visual in mind, if you want, for example, to do like an exploded diagram of a laptop computer to help support something specific in your instructions, and you can't find an example of that, then you can get away with indicating in a box in your document, here's a visual that I would include here and why. Okay, but visuals are important. There are some things you just can't describe well with words. You do want the visuals and the text to work together, though. So the visuals should support what is being described in the text, not take the place of a step describing that action. Make sure you've got the appropriate level of detail and technicality. This is why the audience and use profile, again, is very important for this document, because you don't want to overwhelm people with basic information they know already, and you don't want to leave basic information out that your reader doesn't know. So really think specifically about what your reader's exposure to this technology has been before. Okay, teaching me how to set up a Blu-ray player on my television, for example, wouldn't be that tough because I've had a DVD player. I've messed around with other components. I'm kind of technically savvy. For a lot of people, you'd have to begin from the ground up and explain what everything is, explain what cables go where, and really, really give them a primer. So thinking about that audience specifically, thinking about their needs is extremely important. Make sure the steps are logical and not just the sequence of actions that people take, but also think about when people need to know what they need to know. So for example, if you're teaching me how to cook something, and that is different from writing a recipe, actually teaching me how to cook something, then letting me know what supplies I need well in advance up front is very important. If halfway through the recipe, or I said recipe, I said not, halfway through the instructions for cooking something, you throw out, you know, go get a this type of pan, or go get this ingredient, and you haven't warned me in advance that I need that, I might be halfway through cooking that thing, right? And I find out I don't have that kind of pan or that ingredient. Notes and hazard notices are also important. Highlight dangers, places where people could hurt themselves, or even just places where somebody could potentially mess everything up if they get it wrong. Notes are used for clarification. Cautions prevent mistakes that could happen. A warning actually alerts you to something that might cause bodily harm. Okay, there's a slight nuance here between warning and danger, but essentially both of these are indications that if you do this step wrong, or if you're not careful, or if you do X instead of Y, you could be in serious trouble. And be aware of the visuals. Make sure these things are visually distinctive from the rest of the text. Finally, tips for readability. Direct address, active voice, imperative mood. Okay, for an example of that, read this sentence. Use direct address active voice, and imperative mood. Direct address, you're talking to the reader directly. Active voice, you are putting the verb up front. In other words, you are describing the actor doing the action, not the action being done, right? The boy kicked the ball, or the girl kicked the ball, is active. The ball was kicked by the girl is passive. You want to use the active voice. And the imperative mood is when you start with a verb like use. Right? You're telling me what to do. Use this, turn this, pick up that. Use short, logically shaped sentences. Long sentences and instructions are problematic because oftentimes we're looking at the instructions as we're performing the task. Right? So short sentences are easier to follow. Use parallel phrasing. In other words, just like in this step of this list of 5 steps, the grammar of each step is the same. That's parallel phrasing. Okay. Phrase instructions affirmatively, telling them what to do, unless you're warning them to avoid a specific step. And then use transitions reasonably to mark time and sequence. Next, do this. The only caution I would have there is you don't want to necessarily begin every sentence with first, second, third, fourth if you have a numbered list, for example, if you've given some other indication of the numeric order of those steps. But if something has to happen at the same time, if something has to happen immediately, if something has to happen, use those transitional phrases to indicate that. Effective design, again, look at the examples in your text of what instructions can look like. Okay, making the visual appearance of the instructions inviting and clear. And they don't have to necessarily be fancy, just including headings and subheadings, just including white space to divide up different types of information, or occasionally slipping in graphic images like an icon that indicates a danger, for example. These things can make a tremendous difference, even if you're not really a whiz on your word processor. And then be conscious of those chunks we talked about in chapter 10 are present in your instructions. So you don't just dive in with the first step and end with the last step. Okay, so look at what the introduction needs to do. Get readers interested in doing this task, understanding why it's important. Give them a heads up of kind of key steps or key warnings, anything you think they need to know right up front. Then give us the body, which will be the steps, and then a conclusion, which can describe what should this thing look like once they've finished it. Provide additional follow-up information. How do you maintain your bonsai tree once you've planted it? Okay, or provide any last-minute troubleshooting advice. Okay, that is it. So, my apologies. One thing to be conscious of is that you need to evaluate the usability of instructions carefully, particularly for the writing workshop you'll be conducting for this set of instructions. I've asked you to complete the basic usability survey on page 484 for each of the 2 classmate drafts you look at. That is essential, and I need you to complete that, all the information in there in this order, answer those prompts, just to make sure that you've done a thorough, complete job. So to get full points, you do have to use that. I would definitely, once you've drafted your instructions, go back and apply that to your instructions to make sure that you've identified any gaps you can, because then the feedback you get from your peers, your classmates, will be things that you have not seen. And that is it for chapter 20. Again, read the text carefully, look over the visuals, and just pay careful attention to the really useful advice, the checklists, these things like this usability survey that Lannan provides you to help you to really do a bang-up job of preparing these documents.